Yeah, I definitely see myself as that voice. I definitely see myself as sort of a role model, but I'm still 100% like a 21-year-old kid who's just now learning about the music industry and still learning. So I'm definitely going to still I'm definitely still going to make mistakes. I'm still going to say things. And, I still 100%, I speak for me first. I speak for Montero first. Everything else comes second. Yeah. And, I still 100%, I speak for me first. I speak for Montero first.
The young man speaking is Montero Lamar Hill, a troubled digital native turned internet personality sensation overnight. In less than the amount of time it takes one to earn a college miseducation degree, Montero has found himself planted in the middle of the world stage, malignantly famous, adored and hated, yet overwhelmed with firestone-like media pressure. An entire career ahead of himself, though a man boy of bite-sized potential and very little to offer outside of a keen knack for internet wizardry and thought manipulation via social media, symbology, and signaling. The question is, should infant hands play with fire? Young Hill wages war on the future of a generation and makes the ultimate Faustian bargain to feel loved by his supporters, fulfilling his deepest desires, whilst feeding his eternal void within and terrorizing his detractors from without. You are about to witness the making of the end of a young libertine who is yet to begin. The modern-day Dorian Gray, Montero Hill, aka Lil Nas X, has entered the limelight zone.
The openly gay hip-hop star Lil Nas X is holding nothing back in his new video for Montero, Call Me By Your Name. The official YouTube video has more than 88 million views. Its biblical imagery and intense eroticism are giving his fans life and apparently scaring his critics to death.
Word around town is that Lil Nas X is some version of Satan incarnate, the Wicked Witch of the South, or in other towns up north, it is said he is some type of savior, the new, young and queer voice of neoliberal postmodern progressivism, here to promise everyone true freedom, where everyone gets to live their own truth. Pleasure is king, free lap dances and sex toys for everyone.
I'm still 100% like a 21-year-old kid who's just now learning about the music industry.
Whichever side of the landmass you are on, the kid, yes, 21-year-olds are still children it appears, the kid is amassing renown, fame, and attention, barely wine cooler legal, and he has held Billboard chart record status. Some say he is the voice of a generation. Possibly he is a voice of a generation. In fact, I would agree, yet we shouldn't presume this voice is one worthy of praise and promotion. Perhaps his message is toxic and is coming from a source of toxicity, therefore unacceptable and unfit for public consumption. Lil Nas X is not a voice, but a voice of voices, robotic drone-like voices that represent the alienated, atomized, and depersonalized digital native generation of children born and raised on the internet and highly accessible pornography. Confused, disturbed, and insecure, underdeveloped socially and intellectually, possibly the greater part of this generation finds solace in rabid displays and emotional vomiting as art expressed by the young and lost Montero. Not merely another story of the blind leading the blind, but the blind, deaf, and dumb leading the yet-to-be-born. A future that will never be. A forebortion. An extinction preconceived. Montero's story details something new, something different yet very familiar. It speaks for the generation of a dying and collapsing civilization. The final generation before complete breakdown. The Goths and barbarian kingdoms are deconstructing the weakened boundaries of our postmodern day Rome. Lil Nas X is truly no one special, nothing worthy of notoriety. He is a voice of many, a splice or sliver of the disturbed and digital hive mind. He is a culture mule, an alphabet community rubber stamp, a copy of a copy of a copy, postmodern mass man, or boy, as meme. It is clear America is undergoing a current crisis. And no, I am not referring to the crisis of the current pseudo-scientific biological variety, manufactured and fabricated by mainstream media and the medical industry complex. I am referring to our current crisis of meaning and identity. Moral decay, social media, and the attention economy have systematically destroyed our ability to make value judgments and know ourselves, in turn creating mass disillusionment and a disconnect in how we as humans relate. Prior to this technological boom, this massive social crisis has been in development since the end of World War II, and has gone on to sear the consciences of impressionable youth since the counterculture of the 60s. But technology, and even culture, is incomplete without its muse, its sensual messenger, or music. We discover intellectual dishonesty and deception when individuals downplay the influence of music on its audience. Anthony Fontano, of the Needle Drop fame, and his dismissive commentary in a recent interview with Montero Hill, is a prime example of such dishonesty.
Thing about a lot of these arguments and takes that there sort of seems to be this greater obsession, and this is like always the narrative, even going back to when I was younger, and I remember like rock bands being on trial for saying crazy stuff in their lyrics or something like that. There always seems to be this like, think of the children, sort of situation where you're worried about the downfall of society. And this has been the pitch for how many decades now, for how many generations? Like, when is the downfall happening? Because all of these people sort of seem to be referencing back to a time when, well, back then the downfall was happening too. Like, we were in the middle of the downfall then too. Like, we're making America great again to make it the time when we were also talking about the downfall happening. It's like we're always in this moment where the sky is falling. And I don't know, it's sort of like it's just new to some people for some reason, or they're just not kind of getting hip to the fact that none of this is new, or it's just like old, like, playing with the kind of imagery that you're playing with. Rock bands have been doing that since like forever. Why can't a rapper do it? Why can't you do it without making the point that you're trying to make?
As Plato believed far before music had an industry, nor a speaker through which to hear it, music is indeed an opiate of the masses. Sarah Whitfield accurately describes his perspective in her 2010 work, Music, Its Expressive Power and Moral Significance. She states, Plato assumed that music's expressive character resembled certain aspects of the inner life and pointed to higher spiritual realities. Plato acknowledged the innate psychological and spiritual nature of music, and concluded that because music could arouse and habituate particular emotions, it could also shape the character of its listener. She continues to describe the nature of music as persuasive and how it can shape the thoughts and emotions of its audience. Because music was primarily imitative, it mirrored man's sensual and intellectual life. Music could shape thought, action, and perception in powerful ways to which most people were oblivious. Is Fontano and X's fans alike oblivious to the power of message in music? Yet, moreover, the power of its medium, social media, that has today rearranged our reality, reconstructed our ability to relate to one another, and revolutionized our connection to culture. The building block of any civilization and society. Art of the past and other eras in history did not have the all-encompassing influence of social media as a machine of enculturation, an influence that transmutes culture into a plastic, a substance of the unnatural, a type of anti-nature that lacks substance. Turning art into a meme and man into a product. Think about it.
That. there always seems to be this like, oh, think of the children, sort of situation where you're worried about the downfall of society. And this has been the pitch for how many decades now, for how many generations? Like, when is the downfall happening?
Apparently, Fontano cannot put the point into its proper perspective. No prior era can be compared to ours of today in such a way. If our society of the past was founded on a set of principles, values, and structures, giving us the foundation on which our society is grounded today, and these things suddenly and in short order were destroyed and removed without significant structures to replace them, how would our society avoid falling down without a stable structure to keep it standing? You cannot compare the minds, modes, and mores of the classic or industrial age to that of the information age with such a broad brush. If the tools make the man, you cannot compare men who operate and function with spears to those who use SBRs. Not only has our culture changed, but even the wiring of our brains and forms of interaction have been uprooted. Evidence continues to prove that this change is significantly negative and presents credible examples of sociological, economical, biological, psychological, spiritual, and yes, societal downfall. His argument is immature and simply ridiculous, and to make it, one would have to desperately rely on the exceptions to the rule, or outlier optimists of Pollyanna ilk like Pinker. Atheistic libertarianism always paints one into a corner whereby smart, truthful, and moral arguments for societal guidance can never be found. This brings us directly to the mental, emotional, and spiritually detrimental music of Lil Nas X, a voice of a generation, an aspiring role model for children, described by his timely release of authored children's book, C is for Country.
Think of the children, sort of situation where you're worried about the downfall of society. Think of the children.
Clearly, Montero nor Fontano share a sincere and empathic concern for the healthy development of children. Typically, you will find these types of diversion tactics that focus on easy targets like Candace Owens and mainline conservative talking points, or nominal Christianese lip service as moral objections to artistic freedom. It's always a finger pointed at weak conservatism or churchianity as straw man targets that obscure the importance of basic morality and the social responsibility to children's psychosocial development. Also, you will find the postmodern blending of childlike freedom and irresponsibility with the role played by the adult in society. The role of the child and the role of the adult have merged, so to speak. Or we could say the difference between maturity and immaturity has vanished. Culture today appeals to the kidult spectrum, whereby children are treated and considered as eligible adults, and adults by age are described by eternal youth free from any binding responsibility or standard of maturity. Interestingly, the bedrock of a grown adult is responsibility, maturity, and of course wisdom. Yet these ideals are no longer practiced, valued, nor encouraged today. The kidult wants to be a child, and they destroy authentic children by forcing them to grow up faster than their developmental stages naturally allow. Foregoing their role as guidance and protection, postmodern adults revert to childlike behavior, embellishing their rights to ignorance and irresponsibility as an expression of liberation, leaving the next generations in the dust, bereft of structure, stability, and know-how, freed up to become food for the virtual machine, the new parent and god of postmodern man. With this dynamic, you get Lil Nas X, children book author and hypersexual nymphette of Billboard list fame, as a legitimate role model and influence for the young. When stable, responsible, mature, and virtuous adults are no longer an influential part of society, this type of process becomes the norm.
I think it's a really beautiful video, and it feels like we are being asked to witness and appreciate a sexuality that has not been passed around Twitter and shown to everyone in this way before. And that it feels to me like a brilliant maneuver to make something beautiful and inspiring.
What sets apart musical influence of this age from, say, those of the past, as Fontano attempts to equivocate, is these specialized technologies and their dynamics within the culture of the information age. The industrial age, musical influence pales in comparison. Let me explain. Music today is designed, driven, and administered in ways that cannot be matched anywhere in history. Four, but not limited to, key factors exist. The internet, providing ubiquity and global connectivity. Social media, providing automated enclaves of culture that inform, communicate, and build upon themselves in rapid succession, changing minds and masses of people within hours, even minutes. Smart devices, providing instantaneous contact and promotion of ideas and culture to every person in milliseconds. 24 hours a day, every single day of roughly every single person's life. Lastly, as Sherry Turkle would describe, all of this creates the universal tethered experience for all society. A hyperconnectivity to a virtual world that is constantly changing and signaling, while simultaneously significantly detaching and disconnecting us from the material world more and more, whereby our physical reality battles for attention under the predominance of a virtual one, further detaching us from the physical world of relationships, even our own bodies. This conflict destabilizes the human field of communication, as well as our ability to function in reality or understand what reality truly is. Reality has now become meta. We now operate in a plural reality. This human interactive and hypoactive experience is unprecedented, unmatched, and literally unheard of in any prior historical context. Yet Fontano wants to compare culture and musical messages of the industrial 60s, 80s, and 90s to that of the information age of 2021. Utterly mind-boggling. To further refute his dismissive take on the relationship between modern music messaging and children, in addition to the point made earlier about children losing their traditional guidance provided to the structural role of the mature adult, we can address the four-factor model and its effect on children. Firstly, by recognizing the nature of smart technology, the internet, social media, and the tethered experience as a hindrance on parents. As a result, this dynamic creates an additional barrier, one between the child and its caretakers, guardians, and sources of guidance. Here we find children battling technology for the attention of their parents as well. But then to add the fact that these very parents also practice a new libertine culture that denies the building blocks of adulthood, making the entire situation much worse and increases its toxicity. We can also look at how music culture and music industry content is one of the driving forces in social media communication. Look at TikTok, for example. The entire platform is virtually predicated on the contributions of the music industry and music cultural developments. Challenges, trends, and dances are visceral examples of real-time social media culture creation. This platform is also used to shape and mobilize political movements. Establishment corporations and governmental organizations are not ignorant to the social engineering power of these digital formats. To add, children now, in many cases, own their own personal devices or are exposed at high rates to content on the devices of others. The four-factor information model puts children in an emotional mature predicament that is not found in any prior civilization. Children suffer differently in this era from those of the past due to a marked increase in digital mediums and non-reality interaction, multi-technological dependence, and exposure to adult messaging and signaling, accompanied by, on the part of their guardians, a standard inability to monitor and even censor such a vast and invasive virtual machine. The old instruction you would hear before art media of the past holds little relevance today. Discretion is advised. The advanced, multifaceted, and extensive connectivity of the network society makes such discretion nearly impossible without a concerted effort in moral human intervention. Now, we can, to be fair, gather that Fontano's perspective on music and its messages are results of his atheism and staunch libertarianism. An idealist indeed, not to mention his career and arguably his identity relies on the function and success of the poisonous music industry itself. However, this does not negate the fact that music negatively impacts culture and the mass mind when its message is toxic, and bears little public responsibility or accountability for that which it normalizes. Simply because he does not believe in something does not mean it is not present and actively taking its course. Ignorance is common fare in 2021, unfortunately. Now, I do not think it's a surprise that Montero delivers such toxic messages. He clearly is a troubled young man, confused, immature, and unstable in ways that might be considered normal for young people today. Simply look at these statistics, or try having a conversation of depth without smart device presence and fiddling. It's like pulling teeth. Howard Gardner and Katie Davis in their work, The App Generation, describe a new 21st century whatever generation, doomed by the uncertainty of a dwindling future, anxiety-laden and driven by a desire to feel nothing. Or Eli Pariser's point about generations of today being stuck in the filter bubble, whereby their identities and perspectives are mere products of generated ideas and images filtered through algorithms, completely out of touch with the real material world. App-dependent, codependent, ADD, and depersonalization is more common than intimacy and integrity, anxious and addicted to online pornography and attention. The modern generations are beyond delusional at this point, becoming more machine-like and human-seeming than authentically human. We as a society are losing touch with reality and are dependent on computer-generated versions of one. Health of all sorts are in decline and relationships are becoming more and more disconnected or rare. Marriage and birth rates have reversed, and we are at a point of self-depopulating behavior by technologically induced instinct. All of this precisely demonstrates extreme societal downfall.
Sort of situation where you're worried about the downfall of society. And this has been the pitch for how many decades now, for how many generations? Like, when is the downfall happening?
Montero is just another crying voice of this downfall. No one special, no one significant, just another brick in the postmodern wall. Lil Nas X has no idea who he is, nor does he have many ideas about anything outside of base-level impulses and social media virtual goings-on. This is no longer art. It's a cry for help. And these young and mentally distorted individuals are exploited like mules by the music and culture industries. They are exploited for more than capital gain. They are exploited for cultural gain, political gain, and moreover, technocratic full-spectrum dominance, whereby your mind, your identity, your body are mere extensions and products of the machine. When creativity becomes meme, it loses its meaning. This is to be expected during an era when meaning no longer exists, and reaction is all that is pursued. 2021 society and its debilitating popular culture presents a corporate-funded and politically motivated zero-sum game, void of success in the true sense of the word. Montero represents this void. Such individuals should not be promoted voices for any generation in any broad capacity. However, their voices should be heard, but to be recognized as a symbol of the disease, not the cure. Back to the music. The music industry and popular music culture have played a significant role in the instigation and agitation of our current meaning and identity crisis. Of course, its impact, acceleration, and velocity has been increased by the dominance of smart technology via our modern network society. Hence, the contributions of internet personality and social media wizard Montero Lamar Hill. No longer does music artistry require musical skill, some base level of social responsibility, writing talent, or talent in general. Today, sociopathy is the key ingredient, mixed with a need for attention and simply understanding how to navigate digital platforms, trigger algorithms, and trigger audiences emotionally. One can very easily achieve the perception of success. But even the concept of success is upside down today, whereby you have to become more and more artificial and further away from one's true self to achieve one's ultimate goal. In a sense, these individuals are simply falling to the top. The ultimate Faustian bargain. And in this sense, Fontano is correct when he states nothing here is new. Yet he fails to recognize nothing about the network society in which we live is old. What is ultimately in question here is that which motivates man and his experiences in life today. It is the corruption of the means and the ends. Here we discover people's goals are flawed, empty, and narcissistic, and their means or methods to achieve such goals are sociopathic, neurotic, exploitative, misguided, and delusional. We come to find out most of these musical works are expressions of internal strife and self-hatred being projected onto its audience in attempts to feel some sense of self-worth. Moreover, meaning, the root of identity problems. Some malignant optimists would argue, well, hey, all art is essentially internal strife projected. All artists are troubled, that's why they make art. This view would presume all art has an equal outcome because it has a shared source of inspiration, or altogether disregard the social responsibility art should entail. One artist might relieve his internal strife through painting views of monasteries, whilst another practices his art through brutal images of women being physically disfigured on screen. Though art may have a relative source of inspiration, it is not free of its moral responsibilities in a civilized society. Possibly we are no longer living within one. I think our state of the arts, along with our state of socio-psychology, would describe this possibility. And like Kenneth Boulding would say, we are now embarking on the era of post-civilization.
Just remember something. Man looks in the abyss. There's nothing staring back at him. At that moment, man finds his character. And that is what keeps him out of the abyss.
The grief-stricken artist dances in front of the mirror, dying in each step. His false self withers before him, whilst the mirror plays as his audience reflecting back to him what he already knows. It is this knowledge and compulsion to be reassured of it that eats at him, yet it is his ignorance that keeps him from living. When the image is everything, the self is a whole of nothingness. No matter how great the art, it is only a reflection of the image, not the self. Now that our world and society is defined by the image, whether that be by celebrity or influencer, Instagram post, or TikTok jig, a massive hole has presented itself, in which we all are falling. Sociologists would call this a social crisis, a cultural decadence that ends in anomie, described by Durkheim. A psychologist would call this a type of culturo-technologically induced mass neurosis. Theologists would consider this the great falling away. Realists would call this another example and stage within the downfall of a society. A downfall no honest person would deny is occurring right now in 2021, and has been incrementally spiraling since the dawn of the 20th century. I call it the post-reality era, whereby society engages with avatars through false selves within the virtual abyss. We call it social media, the medium directing our messages. Let's give a logical explanation for the clear and presently dangerous societal downfall we are witnessing in real time. Today, the most significant crisis is that of the individual, the concoction of identity, self, and meaning. We are arguing that society is in downfall as a response to said crisis. How so? The society is a collective of communities, an integrated system. Communities are aggregates of individuals. If society is the tree, the individual is the root. Where the individual is systematically destroyed from within, the group and society is therefore destroyed from without. In other words, the downfall of a society. Let us return to Montero.
I knew what the song was, and it's like, this song is like obviously super explicit. It's like, about this guy who I like explicitly say like I want to help you, pretty much.
To prove our point, Montero here describes how his message literally boils down to a sexually primal impulse towards another man, whom he portrays as Satan, showing a childlike tantrum expressed in anti-Christian symbolism. How original. To add to this bottom feeder level material, the rapper has recently produced a virtual twerking video game. How fitting for a generation defined by sexualized digital media. Though the majority of his career is spiteful mutant rage and neurotic attempts to get angry reactions, the so-called art he produces does not surpass the ideas of a pubescent preteen that tells dirty jokes to feel cool and piss off his parents. Oddly, he is old enough to purchase alcohol, but his behavior and thinking level suggests he is not old enough to be left at home unsupervised by an adult. Very typical of most popular music today, the message is made up by a child mind and pervert of low integrity, lowbrow ideas rooted in narcissistic spite. A consistent lack of creativity, lack of thought and depth, lack of meaning and talent, though a plethora of ignorance and obnoxious diatribes. If a downfall in society is not at hand, one is clearly ravaging the realm of the arts. Not to say the arts have not always been filled with nonsense, perversion, and ignorant rants rooted in narcissistic appeals to one's broken and undeveloped inner self. But the arts today are objectively defined by such, and have been turned into factory-produced and shrink-wrapped packaged global market goods pumped into the masses via algorithms and corporate-approved formulas. Lil Nas X is yet a perfect example of this shock and schlock digital music art form of 2021. Furthermore, Hill demonstrates the unoriginal act of turning Christian ideals on their head to attain virality and reaction, and most importantly, to appear edgy. Mainstream art is dead, and possibly it has been for decades. The music industry demonstrates this, but the technology and social media platforms of our information age through which the arts are now filtered only make this point clearer and more obvious. Fontano and Montero further display such artistic depth and mud-headedness in their interview. Their messages, thought processes, and careers are clear examples of the end-stage conditions of a falling society, described through their decaying medium and the emaciated messages that hang by mere threads. Their culture of death depicts the death of society as human existence has known it, a true downfall, described by a falling that is historically brought upon by way of cultural instability, the obsolescence of God, and moral decay. Hereby, the music industry is the muse of the beautiful destruction, a fantastic damage where the company flow is fluid and erratic, reactionary and juvenile, and no longer independent but codependent, like whining children neglected by their unloving parents. According to Anthony Fontano, no such downfall exists, yet current psychosocial statistics and basic historical evidence prove otherwise. Often you will hear the so-called progressive argument, "Hey, our culture is evolving." Yet the person making the assertion tends to know very little about what truly defines culture and the significant role it plays in the structure of a civilization. Included will they have even less understanding of what makes for a stable civilization. These concepts, and most significant concepts in general, fly over the heads of the generations today, given that they live in such a pre-packaged, automated, and Googleized society of instant gratification and learned helplessness. They generally exist on a continuous path of least resistance. They have been born and raised in a society that thinks and handles most things for them. A great majority today know what they know through social media posts, memes, and mainstream network mockingbird media outlets. And their area of knowledge and understanding does not expand beyond those very meager and limited spheres. Their level of life experience is even lower. These things are legitimately depressing to think about. Ignorant and arrogant know-nothings could be a harsh yet honest description of the mass man and woman, teen, young adult of today. Though they will be adroit experts in social media trends and communication, whiz kids of conventional wisdom, aka mainstream propaganda, specialists when it comes to memes and multi-layered internet lore, yet they all are far removed from material reality and real living, book knowledge, authenticity, and proper human interpersonal function. Adding to the disconnect, we discover extreme levels of sexual dysfunction and distortion, obsession, and compulsion. Overall, there is a vast interpersonal corrosion that exists within the generations. Today, modern youth and adults' existential crisis is mitigated and relieved through autoerotism and escapism. Young men escape to a virtual world of video games and masturbation to relieve anxiety and to feel real. Many girls are doing the same more often today, or practice emotional intercourse, having their fantasy selves fulfilled and acknowledged through exaggerated attention on social media, keeping them in a perpetual state of falsehood, the imposter syndrome, far removed from who they really are in reality. Interestingly, social media has the biggest influence on the disruption of identity development and single-handedly has deconstructed social relations, romantic and platonic. Yet the majority of people use this social media and spend far more time with their platforms than they do with physical reality and people in the real world. Though physical intercourse is on the decline culturally, virtual forms of autoerotism and hypersexualism is on the increase. The hookup culture that dominates what's left of courting, now called dating, is simply a demonstration of detached individuals masturbating with each other's bodies. Just like the postmodern art of Lil Nas X and many like him, it is objectified, rooted in the most base level of the human animal, the mating act. Carnal copulation put to music and verse, like a howl in the night. The art becomes the mere means to an aimless and empty end. So too does the act of romantically relating find its way down to a transactional exchange of objects and split-off parts to be used and discarded. To deny this postmodern crisis of meaning, identity, and human relating would not simply come across myopic. It would be non-rational, bird-brained even. Basically dumb as a box of lip-syncing TikTok influencers. And that is pretty much what we get in recent Anthony Fantano interview with Lil Nas X himself. The Dorian Gray of our postmodern day, selling the old ends of hedonism in a new way through new technological means. Yet the same fate awaits him patiently and merciless. We are gambling with our future. With technology as pilot, we sit in the backseat drunk, handing over the keys to our designated driver. We willingly commit sociocide for the grips of distraction, emotional gratification in pursuits of pure pleasure. We have become robots that live through reacting to technological notification and upkeep. Our points of view are products of artificial intelligence, ironically, turning us into the true artificially intelligent. We are the AI, compelled and influenced by market-driven forces rooted in narcissism. Lash was correct when he predicted the forming of the culture of narcissism in 1979. In 2021, we outdo his work by leaps and bounds. For a trinket, a trend, or a big O, we frolic in the abyss, at the expense of our society's structural and mental stability. The likes of Fantano and Montero basically respond with the postmodern glib of the masses. Just let it happen. To their soon dismay, they will discover that all civilizations require rules, limitations, checks and balances to function with stability. And yes, that includes the arts. Scripture makes this clear. Ignorance is no longer an excuse. Even Plato has geared the rationalist with similar knowledge, yet we refuse to listen. The stiff-necked and stubborn in heart and ears forever resisting the truth for a lie. Fontano asks, "Oh, but what downfall do you speak of?" Seeking a conspicuous sign, they look around and claim there is no downfall because the sky is not literally falling on top of them. Their spoiled eyes cannot see that it is crumbling incrementally and has been for generations. The process is too slow and systematic for them to notice, like the dance a growing flower makes during its growth process. This generation only lives, feels, and sees in extremes. If it is not extreme, blasted across social media, bloody, filled with veins, morbid and sexualized, viral and on repeat by the milliminute, no one notices, and it simply does not exist. It's almost as if these industry types live in their own false reality or filter bubble, a hyper-reality in fact, where only their solipsistic version of the world exists. One where anything can be labeled as art, and art is life. Yet no one seems to pick up on the elephant in the room quietly in the corner whispering, life imitates art. Or to put it simple, art creates culture, and culture informs life. But what if the art expresses messages detrimental to the development of young minds? And these new messages now have a new technological medium from which to project their sting, latching itself onto every mind in every quarter in a fashion unknown to the history of man, preemptively altering future generations and the culture that gives them structure. Could this type of neurotic art be an unwanted visitor during an era of blatant meaning decay and crisis of identity? What person in their right mind serves hard drinks at an AA meeting? Sure, it's legal, but is it wise? Well, welcome to the Limelight Zone, where reality is not always what it seems, and your stay is typically a short one.